all, let's see the next topic of input-output organization, which is asynchronous data transfer. So in today's lecture, we are going to discuss about an introduction to what is asynchronous data transfer, what are the methods of asynchronous data transfer, such as stroke control and handshaking methods with advantages and disadvantages. So coming to the introduction, generally when a data has to be transmitted from source to destination, there are two ways of transmitting the data. One is a synchronous data transfer and other is asynchronous data transfer. So what do you mean by a synchronous data transfer? So it is a type of transmission in which a common clock pulse is shared between the sender and the receiver in order to permit a synchronization in the synchronization of communication between them. So overall, it is a type of communication which is time dependent. That is, the transmitter and the receiver both has to be available online at the same point of time for the communication to take place. If you take an example, audio video calls where both the sender and the receiver have to be live online at the same point of time. So such type of data transfer is said to be called as a synchronous data transfer. Coming to asynchronous, it is a type of transmission in which the sender and the receiver, they doesn't depend on a common clock. They have their own internal clocks and they doesn't need any extra common clock. So in simple ways, it is such a type of a communication in which sending of a data can be done at any time without having a dependency on the receiver. It doesn't The sender and the receiver does not need to be online at the same point of time, and the communication can take place at any point of time without depending upon the other party. Best example, if you consider the email. So in that case, the receiver need not have to be online when the sender is sending a mail. So this is an example of asynchronous data transfer mechanism. So this is a synchronous mechanism where both the sender and the receiver are online at the same point of time and they are exchanging the messages between them. In case of asynchronous data transfer, both the sender and the receiver need not be online at the same point of time. Best example is your email. Next, in a computer system, we know that between a CPU and the input-output interface, they are independent of each other because we know that there are differences between the CPU and input-output interface. Because in terms of the speed, there are differences between them. In terms of the data transfer, there is a difference between them. So in terms of the how they operate, there are differences between them. So the CPU and the input-output devices are totally independent of each other, so they are not a synchronous data transfer mechanism is not possible in case of communication between the CPU and input output peripherals. So here the communication takes place in the form of asynchronous mechanism. So what are the different types of methods used in asynchronous data transfer mechanism between the sender and the receiver? So asynchronous data transfer between two independent units requires some control signals to be transmitted between the communicating parties before the actual data is being transmitted. So there are two types of methods. One is a stroke control mechanism and other is a handshaking mechanism. So coming to a stroke control, it is one way of a transfer by means of which a stroke signal or a stroke pulse is supplied by the one of the communicating parties in order to indicate the other party when the transfer has to occur. So if the source wants to send a message to the receiver, it will first generate a stroke signal and send it to the receiver so that the receiver will identify that the sender wants to communicate with it. That is called a stroke control mechanism. The other type of mechanism is a handshaking mechanism. So in case of a handshaking mechanism, for each and every data that is being sent from one end to the other end, a control signal is also being transferred along with the data path. That indicates the presence of the data on the bus. And similarly, at the receiver side in the handshaking mechanism, the unit which is receiving the data will respond with another control signal which acts as an acknowledgement of the data to the sender. So let us see these methods in detail. The first method is a stroke control method. So here a stroke pulse or a strobe signal, it is supplied by one of the units to indicate the other unit when the transfer has to occur. So the strobe can be activated by either a source unit or it can be activated by a destination unit. So if it is initiated by the source unit, we call it as a source initiated strobe mechanism. And if the transfer is initiated by the destination unit, we call it as a destination initiated strobe mechanism. So let us see. So this is an example. This is the block diagram of a strobe control mechanisms. This is a source initiated strobe mechanism and this is a destination initiated strobe mechanism. Coming to a source initiated strobe mechanism, we have a source unit and the destination unit. If a particular source wants to send a data to the destination unit, it will first send a strobe signal. It will create a strobe signal and send it to the destination unit. Along with the strobe signal, it will also send the data onto the data bus. So from the source to destination, the data will be placed onto the data bus. So here the strobe is a single line that informs the destination unit when a valid data word is available on the data bus. The information on the data bus and the strobe signal remains in the active state in order to allow the destination unit to receive the data. So this is how the data is transmitted from source to destination using a source initiated strobe mechanism. So if you see the timing diagram, the source will first place a strobe signal onto send a strobe signal to the destination unit and it places a valid data onto the data bus. And coming to a destination initiated strobe mechanism, the destination unit activates the strobe pulse to inform the source to provide the data. So whenever the destination is ready to receive the data, it will send a strobe signal to the source unit, asking it to place the data onto the data bus. The source will respond now by placing the requested data onto the data bus. And this data must remain valid and it should remain in the bus as long as the destination unit accepts it. So whenever the destination unit accepts this particular data which is placed on data bus by the source unit, the destination unit will disable this strobe signal and the source unit so that the source unit will remove the data from the data bus. So if you see the timing diagram, it will first send a strobe signal to the source unit so that the source unit will place a valid data onto the data bus. So this is it. So in case of a source initiated strobing mechanism, the data bus carries the binary information and the strobe is nothing but a single line that informs the destination unit when a valid data word is available on the data bus. And if you see the timing diagram, the source unit first places the data on the data bus. The information on the data bus and the strobe signal, they remains in active state in order to allow the destination unit to receive the data. Coming to the destination initiated strobe mechanism, the destination unit will activate the strobe pulse in order to inform the source to provide the data. And the source, as a response, it will respond by placing the requested data onto the data bus. And this data must be available on the data bus. It must be valid and remain in the bus as long as the destination unit accepts it. So whenever the destination unit accepts a particular data which is present in the data bus, it will disable the strobe signal and the source also removes the data from the data bus. Whenever the source sees that the strobe signal is disabled, it itself removes the data from the data bus because it is an intimation to the source that the information has been received by the destination. So what is the disadvantage of a strobe mechanism? So, in case of a source initiated strobing or destination initiated strobe mechanisms, each has their own disadvantages. So, in case of a source initiated strobing mechanism, the source unit is initiating the transfer, but it doesn't have an idea of whether the destination unit has actually received the data item that was placed onto the bus. So, it doesn't have any information. The source is just sending a data by sending a strobe signal along with the data on the data bus, but it doesn't know whether the information is reached exactly at the other end or not. So that is a disadvantage. Coming to the destination initiated strobe mechanism, a destination unit that initiates the transfer it doesn't know whether the source unit has actually placed the data on the data bus. So say for example, the destination has sent a strobe signal to the source, but we don't know how much amount of time the destination has to wait before it come to know that a data is placed onto the data bus. So each of them have their own disadvantages. So these disadvantages can be overcome by the next method, which is called as a handshaking method. It solves these two problems. So in case of a handshaking method, it is one of the most commonly used method. In this method, along with each data item, a control signal is accompanied, and that indicates the presence of a data in the bus. And the unit which is receiving the data item, it responds with another control signal which acts as an acknowledgement of data. So whenever a sender is sending a data to the receiver will send one more control signal, and this control signal will act as an acknowledgement for the sender that I have received this particular data. So there is an agreement between the two independent units. So we call this method as a handshaking method. So the handshaking in this case, it can be activated either by the source unit or it can also be activated by the destination unit. So before the actual data is sent, a handshaking mechanism is or an agreement is done between the two parties which are involved in the communication. So this particular handshaking method, it solves the problem of a strobe method by introducing a second control signal. And this control signal, it provides a reply to the other unit that has initiated the transfer of information. So there are two methods in handshaking. One is a source initiated handshaking mechanism and other is a destination initiated handshaking mechanism. So let us see the first type of a handshaking mechanism, which is a source initiated handshaking mechanism. So here, this is a block diagram of a source initiated handshaking where we have a source unit and a destination unit. So whenever a source unit wants to send an information to the destination unit, it will first send a data onto the place a data onto the data bus, and it will enable the data valid line. So whenever the data valid line is enabled, it means that it is understood by the destination unit that the valid information is placed onto the data bus. So at the receiver side, the destination unit will accept that particular data from the bus, and it will send an acknowledgement to the received message with the help of a special control signal, which is called as a data accepted signal. So it will enable this data accepted line. So whenever the source unit receives this data accepted signal, then it will disable the data valid signal so that whatever information that is present on the bus will be invalidated. So whenever the destination unit sees that the data valid signal is disabled, it will also disable the data accepted signal so that it is ready to accept the new data. So this is the sequence of events that takes place in the handshaking mechanism in case of a source initiated handshaking. The source unit is initiating the handshaking mechanism. Coming to the destination initiated transfer using a handshaking mechanism. So here destination unit is the one which is going to initiate the transfer process by handshaking mechanism. So it will whenever it is ready to accept the data, it will enable the ready for data line. So it will enable this particular ready for data line. At the same time, whenever the source unit sees this ready for data line enabled, it will place a valid information or a valid data on the data bus, and it will enable the data valid signal. So now the destination unit will accept the data from the bus, and it will disable the ready for data line. So whenever this ready for data line is disabled, the source unit now it will disable the data valid line, and in so that it invalidates the data which is present on the data bus. An initiated handshaking mechanism. So if you look at this, so the source unit, in case of this is the source initiated handshaking and this is the destination initiated handshaking mechanism. So the source will place the data on the data bus and enable the data valid line. So this is your data bus. It will place the data on the valid data on the data bus, and then it will enable the data valid line. So whenever the data line valid line is enabled, the data from the bus is taken by the receiver and it will enable the data accepted line. So whenever this source sees the data accepted line, it will disable the data valid signal. And whenever the destination unit sees the data valid signal disabled, it will also disable the data accepted line. So this is how the events takes place. Coming to the destination initiated handshaking mechanism, whenever the destination is ready for data, it will send a ready for data signal to the source. So after seeing a ready for data signal, the source will place a valid data onto the data bus and it will validate the data valid signal. So once the data valid signal has been validated, enabled, the destination unit takes the data from the data bus and it will disable the ready for data signal. And when the ready for data signal is disabled, the source unit will disable the data valid signal. So this is how the communication takes place in case of source initiated and destination initiated handshaking mechanisms. So coming to the destination initiated, the name of the signal which is generated by the destination unit has been changed to ready for data. So the source unit in this case does not place the data on the data bus until it receives the ready for data signal from the destination unit. So it is the destination which is responsible for initiating the data transfer. So from there on, it is whenever it receives the ready for data, it will place the data on the data bus. Data valid signal will be enabled so that the destination will receive the data and data accepted line will be sent. So the same thing, the handshaking procedure follows the same way as a source initiated handshake. So the only difference between the source initiated and the destination initiated transfer is the choice of the initial state. Who is the taking the initiative of performing a handshaking mechanism. Next, coming to the advantages of a handshaking method, this scheme provides more degree of flexibility and reliability because the successful completion of a data transfer, it relies on the active participation by the both units, because for each and every message that is received by any unit, a acknowledgement has to be sent to the other unit. So both of them has to be active in order to implement the handshaking mechanism. If any one of the unit, either the sender or the receiver, is faulty, then the data transfer will not be completed, because uh, such an error, if there is any error during the transfer of data, that can be, say, the sender has sent some data to the receiver, it doesn't receive an acknowledgement. So in that cases of errors, they have to be detected by means of a timeout mechanism. So the sender will wait for some amount of time, after which an alarm, which provides an alarm if the data is not completed within a certain time period. The data transfer doesn't take place. Such type of mechanisms have to be provided in order to take care of any errors during the transmission of data. So these are the different types of asynchronous data transfer mechanisms, which are stroke control mechanism and handshaking mechanism. Thank you.